So I've been thinking a lot about the issues startup face, right? From funding to financial crisis to employee mental health, a lot of things that startup face, which is why we're tweaking the format of our usual podcast show into this, a live session where we even get to engage the audience even while doing these discussions. So today we're going to be talking about a very, 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 very testy topic. It talks about how to handle issues with your startup brand. So if your startup is having a negative rumor that you just can't shake off, or there's something happened and you just can't help it, how do you communicate it to the key stakeholders that are involved in your startup? Number one, the customers. Number two, the investors. And number three, your employees. So it goes both ways. There's the external communications and the internal communications. How do you even get your employees, for instance, to not feel like this is a sinking ship and start running away? Those are the issues we want to actually discuss today. But we're not going to be reactive like most of us Africans are. Sorry, that is not this to anybody at all. Most people are reactive, right? We want to be proactive. How do we nip this in the bud? So we decided to bring in someone who has been in the game for quite some time, and she's going to be helping us understand how to brace your startup, how to build this resilience against the headwinds of startup issues that always come, that always happen. Well, hi, Teresa. Welcome to...
Hi, Emmanuel. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so...
Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So yeah, our very, very first guest in this new format we're employing, Techpoint Unscripted.
Nice to be here. So glad to be opening up the session. I'll try and make it worthwhile.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so please give us feedback on the name. Some people think it's terrible. Some people think it's awesome. Give us feedback. All right. All right. So now, wanted to talk about this, right? We're talking about helping startups build their brand.
Yeah.
Why is it even important in the first place? What does it even mean to actually have a brand as a startup?
Oh, I think it's super important. In a base sense, right? You have businesses, you have products, you have commodities. In any given space or market, and particularly now in the Nigerian startup space, in particular fintech space, there are so many different companies and organizations and products vying for attention. Without a brand, you're a commodity, in essence. You know, you're one of 15 to 25 different people asking us to pay attention to you. Now, this generation, millennials, Gen Z, those two generations were not particularly famous for attention span. So if you're hoping for people's attention, much less their dollars or naira, you actually have to do the work in building credibility, a presence and what have you, so that people know who you are, they take you seriously, they respect what it is you have to offer, you know, and they understand your value proposition, right? So it's bigger than just the product or the service, but what change and impact you're driving. So the question is, why you? Think of it this way: if you have 15 to 20 different people to talk to who are offering roughly the same thing, why should I choose you?
I want to change the world.
Yeah, exactly. To change the world. Whether for bet, Hitler wanted to change the world, so that's not a very good. I mean, it makes us wary, right? And we know a thing or two about change in Nigeria, so that's not exactly a great buzzword for us. So when you talk about it, I want to change the world is not enough. A brand answers the question of why people should pick or choose you. So yeah, that's why brand.
Okay, that's why people decide that Apple is the classy brand.
Exactly.
And every other. I have beef with those people.
You have. I wouldn't say I don't have beef with Apple, but I haven't drunk the Kool-Aid.
Oh.
And I don't plan to. Like, it's a great brand, great product. But first of all, tech is a lot of effort for me as a person, like navigating technology. So any brand that makes it more stressful doesn't really have my attention. So if I have to have a special port to interact with other devices, that doesn't make me feel exclusive. That stresses the heck out of me. So it's a cool brand, lovely products and features, but just not on the Kool-Aid journey with everyone else.
All right. So you heard that right? Don't just think that Techpoint journalists are haters of Apple, right? It's a thing.
It's just
it's a thing, right?
It's too stressful. It's too much effort to be cool. I would like it to be easy.
To be easy and flexible. I can do anything I want to do, right?
Exactly.
One charger charges both my phones, but that doesn't happen
and
yet.
My battery survives for a decent amount of time. And my Microsoft tab sits. It doesn't lie down. Like, we can go on and on. So great product. I'm sure the interface is wonderful, but all the other things is just like, no.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. So yeah, we've digressed a bit there. Yes. Well, let's come back, right? So, but the main topic at hand, what does crisis mean for a startup? What does it even mean?
Before we talk about what a crisis means, I think it's important to make a distinction between an issue and a crisis.
Okay.
Because every time something goes wrong, we tend to think what we often describe a lot of times as a crisis is an issue. So a crisis, right, is usually more short-term. Issues can be protracted, like maybe the way a brand deals or behaves with things. It can be a culture. That may not be a crisis, but there can be an event that makes an issue a crisis. So you can have a moment in the media, or just maybe negative relations with the media, and people are talking about it until it gets to the point where it's damaging to your reputation, can affect things like your stocks and shares. There are certain parameters, right, that you have to cover for an issue to become a crisis. So it's important to understand that difference, right? And I think because of Twitter and this hyper-social environments, it's a little bit unclear sometimes and hazy, the difference between an issue and a crisis, right? So, but what does a crisis mean? A crisis is pretty bad, because it means you've been ignoring an issue for a very long time, or a series of issues, right? For it to become a full-blown crisis. And what usually happens is if you ignore issues long enough, you don't address them, they eventually snowball into crisis, But if you look at most crises, you're close enough, there were always issues around them, and they always that problem was rearing its head in some way or form, but being ignored by leadership or certain people. And people don't always know, right? But things just take on a life of their own and become crisis.
Interesting. Yeah. So can you help us paint a picture of what an issue is? Let's take a fintech startup, for instance. At what point will something be an issue? And at what point will it be a crisis?
I think it's not set in stone. It's dynamic in the sense that what is an issue for one company can very well be a crisis for another, depending on the context. It's very contextual. When I say it's dynamic, that's what I mean. It's really very contextual. So I'll give an example. You may have an issue with an employee may come out and say, oh, I don't like the way these guys handled and treated this. That can still be an issue. It becomes a full-blown crisis when you have 10 employees coming out to talk about, negative behavior, in the workplace, hazing, bullying, God help you, sexual assault of any kind. And then people start to bandwagon and you become the poster child for the next move. And at that point, you've gone from issue to crisis. You deal with one employee, that can be managed, addressed, dealt with. That's still an issue. The moment it becomes a movement, right, and it starts to affect investor interest, it takes up more than 3 media cycles, or even more than 1 or 2 media cycles. You're already at you're at the point of crisis.
Yeah, I can really see the picture, right? Different media houses coming up with angles.
Exactly.
This angle, this bullying, this harassment.
Exactly, and then you become topical. Oh, let's look at bullying and sexual assault in this space. You're in full-on crisis mode, because then you need to be able to move and act fast. But like I said, lots of things would typically start as issues, so you kind of need to handle them accordingly. And I suppose we'll get to it, but you need to plan, which is something we'll get into, I'm sure, as we go along in our conversation. So that would be the primary difference.
Interesting. So I saw a report from Deloitte. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Okay, my God. Okay, so but they surveyed 300 board members and they narrowed down what usually generates crisis into 3 things: corporate reputation, cybercrime, maybe there was a data breach, and rumors. So do you think this is a fair assessment of what usually snowballs into crisis?
I think it's a very fair assessment. If we take corporate reputation, that's why I say it's contextual. Some brands are so beloved. I'll give an example. Let's use entertainment, because the concept or the notion of branding is universal. The difference is, according to industry and sector, it evolves, right? So let's say Rihanna, for instance. The things Rihanna gets away with saying to people, to the media, very few celebrities will get away with it without being pulled into full-on crisis mode. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So she would get away with saying things and just responding to people. There was this thing from like way back when, I don't even remember the year, it had to be in the early 2010s or something of the sort. And someone said something, MTN posted something on, it was on Twitter. And Rihanna says, hey, MTN, I don't give a, insert explicit. Someone else did that. You would have conversations about how you're arrogant, you're proud. I heard this person did this and that, and people will be coming out of the woodworks about how they had a nightmare and a terrible time working with such a person. But Rihanna does it, and it's not even an issue. It's cool and it's conversation. And that takes us back to the concept of reputation. If people see you a certain way and you're able to manage and kind of balance both worlds, you are likely, and it applies to organizations, to get away with something. People think you're a friendly organization, you're not predatory, you are loved. People will make excuses for you. People will be open to thinking that incidents are isolated. However, if you have a reputation of repeatedly doing certain kinds of things, right, then it becomes a cycle and a pattern, and you're unkind and you're problematic and what have you. I don't want to name major brands, but there are two of the, like, they're both tier one banks. One bank, nobody likes banks at the moment now because of all of the issues. But before now, maybe 2-3 years ago, there was a particular bank that no matter what they did, I noticed they always had negative comments in the comment section of their social media page. So I'm like, is this just a them thing or other? So I did a bit of research and I checked out some other, tier one banks as well who might have similar issues, nothing. And even when people were complaining, people were kinder because they didn't view the bank as being hostile. But with this other bank, they saw them as being a bank. It's the common accusation. You should even know who I'm talking about. If you figured it out, good for you. People view this bank as not caring, not about their employees, not about their customers. So they're not seen as a people-centric or people-focused brands. So everything they do is a big deal. You see where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. So I would agree. Now, rumors, everything starts with, I heard. That's how reputations are created. Mm-hmm. I heard this person did this. And if enough people talk about something, key people within your sector or circle start to pick up on it, and someone starts to take an interest in it. Your rivals could start to find people to compile stories, or just a journalist might notice a particular pattern of conversation in speaking to people in a space. So I would agree with those two things. And I mean, data breach kind of speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. If you compromise people's security or data, of course, you're going to have a crisis on your hand because data privacy is like a very huge thing. Also because of the volume of content that companies are collecting. A lot of it, isn't necessary, but everyone is data mining now. So if you gather that much data, you need to do the responsible and equally hard work of making sure that it's safe. So I would completely agree.
Interesting. So interesting point to mention about rumors where people can even get maybe a competitor or someone
absolutely.
Can start
it happens.
No, this is particularly interesting because there was something that was giving me pause last year. Mm-hmm. Because around last year, a lot of critical stories started coming up in the tech space, in the media, for instance. But I was a bit skeptical about it. I have journalistic concerns, but I'm not going to be addressing
those.
But I felt like, could it be someone using the media to target these companies?
That happens. It happens a lot more than people will admit. It could be an individual, a cabal, people with an agenda. And I mean, oftentimes people are paying attention and are looking. It's underhanded, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So people are just waiting for the right opportunity. Some people are just there, people who are pissed off and angry. And the truth is, it is impossible to be a company that has existed for any length of time and not have enemies. Some of them are ex-employees who weren't happy or disgruntled, maybe for good reasons from their perspective. But you probably also had good reasons sometimes as an organization, because I think people forget companies are also made up of people. So this is a difference in opinion and perspective, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know any company, mine inclusive, that will not have disgruntled people out there. So everyone sometimes is just, people are bidding their time. And then when things start to align, it's like, my aha moment. This is the moment I've been waiting for. So you have all of that. People jumping on a bandwagon, or people targeting you and actually using it, or building a case, along or just around you for quite some time.
That's quite scary because, I mean, we all know how media is powerful, and we all know how bad news spreads. The media does not even need to even put too much effort into the story to spread
it can even be lazy. It will do the work if it's sensational enough.
Wow. But okay, let's not go down that rabbit hole, right? Because I can already picture a lot of conversations where even the source, there are some people that approached us. Yeah, it's unscripted, so let's go. The
Yeah.
people that approached us and they were like, "Oh, this happened," and the moment we tell them, "Okay, give us time,
Let's investigate and let's do some research.
no, we want it hot, we want it now, we want this. Not one, not two occasions. Like we saw those kind of instances, and sometimes they say that okay, you guys are wasting time. It's just, I think, one or two people that allowed us to do proper investigations, told us to even work with other media organizations to actually do something proper. So I know that okay, yeah,
You
whatever.
have a legitimate claim. You're not trying to just pet. And sometimes it can be legitimate. But the thing is, it's your competitor finding an angle. We've been in scenarios handling crisis, for a client. One client in particular comes to mind where we were advising and we were explaining to them the mindset that their competitor, like, look, if we wanted to do this as PR people, we could take this angle, we could do this and do that. So once it's your job, if you understand the power of storytelling, you understand how very easy it is for people to wait for a moment. And sometimes your issues or your growth, because really mistakes are part of your growth, any organization's growth process and journey. But it's very easy for people to take that and build something out of it, and kind of use it for an agenda. Sounds a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels a bit extra, but it does happen. It does happen and it's very real a lot of times.
Okay. All right. So let me pull back a bit, right? So startup branding 101 to prevent that crisis. What do we need to do?
I wish I could shout this with a megaphone to Nigerian startups and businesses. Create a plan. A lot of businesses wait until crisis hits or issues are starting to escalate. They may not have a crisis yet. And that's when you want to start reacting. Do not be reactive. It's very important with your reputation and with these things to be very proactive about your approach. Have a strategy. If you're working in across any organization, any business type, but if you're even remotely, it's B2C or you're public facing or worse, you deal with money. Hello, fintechs, right? You deal with money. I think some of the two most sensitive sectors I know, money and food, because you're dealing with the things people put in their mouth. So people are more likely to freak out and your brand can take a major hit for it. And then money, it's a very sensitive topic because we already live in an environment that is very distrusting and for good reasons, right? We're not in a high trust environment. So you can't be a fintech, you can't be a startup trying to drive impact who is new and not have a crisis plan in place. People tend to focus on responses, but the bigger part of crisis management is actually reputation building. That's what allows you weather the storm. And that does not happen overnight or when the issue has come. So one thing I say to my clients, if you're handling the issue, and people with companies we talk to and businesses we deal with or relate to, founders, managers, you ought to have a crisis management plan in place. Because if you're only dealing with things when the issue or the crisis has arisen, you are late, right? Because you don't have the time to build the reputation, the credibility, to envisage. I mean, a crisis plan will contain scenarios. What are the different areas you deal in? What are the most likely complaints and issues? So you would do a lot of scenario mapping, right, to account for those things. Of course, there can be unique scenarios, but give or take, because your operations are limited, so too will planning and possibilities, be. So, I mean, with founders, it will be bullying, sexual assault or misconduct. There are a broad range of things people can do, verbal abuse of some kind or whether money laundering or any financial malpractice. So there's a limit. So you kind of look at it across board and you should have that plan in place to protect your hard work, your organization, and yourself as well. So it's super important to plan ahead. That would be 101. Have a PR and crisis plan. I think this is very important because a lot of startup founders and managers right now are so conversion focused that they are forgetting that they're on their path to becoming corporate organizations. Right? You can't be so numbers, raising money, all of that. First of all, it can mess with your numbers. It will mess with raising money. If you are not building the brand and taking care of the brand, it's the entity, right? It's trust. When people give you their money, they're saying, I trust you to do what you say you will do with it and to give good return on investment. Or they trust you with whether that money, it's like more cash or they're paying for products, right? So you need to invest in the entity that gives you that credibility to deal with that. So it's not just all about conversion and raising money very important aspect. So I'm not denying product development, but you want to make sure that you are building the brand and the credibility and the equity you need to weather the not so great days. Because there's no company, it's only a matter of time. There will be an issue, there will be a crisis. It's inevitable if you plan to be around for a very long time. So create a plan and don't be caught unawares. Don't be like a deer in headlights, like, oh my God, I'd never thought this would happen. Why? You're in business, you're dealing with people. Of course it will happen, right? So that would be like 101 base level. Make a plan, be proactive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of your point about Rihanna, right? Rihanna gets away with some things because people already like her.
Yeah.
So you can say most things and people go to the ends of the world for someone like her, right? So it reminded me of something one of my guys in the newsroom said last week. Something happened on Twitter and they were dragging a certain founder. And it was a case of it's okay to drag a founder as long as it's not a favorite on Twitter. There are founders that you'll be dragging them for that exact same thing.
But you wouldn't touch other people for that thing. And it's life. I was going to joke and say, this is why in church, when they tell you pray for favor, open your mouth and pray for favor. But jokes aside, right? Some people are just liked. There are double standards in life. You can fight about it or you can deal with it, right? And they will always exist because we respond to people differently. How I can say something and it doesn't come off a certain way, but someone else does it, and because of your perception of them, it's a big deal. And it's a lot of things, what we think people mean by that. So you need to make sure that you have the personality for your mistakes and your errors. And that's life. I mean, people look at the Bill Clinton thing. Bill Clinton got away with bloody murder, let's be honest. Almost unscathed. Very few presidents before and after him would have gotten away with it. Even Donald Trump, as ridiculous as he was to a lot of people, he got away with things other people wouldn't have gotten away with. Obama, everybody gets away with their own kind of crap. It's like, it's the reality of and that's what branding is. How do people view you? And that in turn affects every single thing you do and people's response to it. So you must be clear on how you are perceived by people before you start acting. There must be that understanding as an organization. If you don't have the brand equity for certain things, you've not built the relationships, you've not built the likability, people are not endeared to you, people don't see you as a favorite, do not do some things, right? And if you notice, it's not just from person to person, or organization to organization, but even within organizations. Let's go back to the Rihanna example. There are things Rihanna of, what would be a good example? Of the early days, Umbrella Rihanna couldn't have gotten away with that. Rihanna of, exactly, can get away with. And it keeps, because you're growing the brand as well. At the time, people wouldn't have viewed her as a bad girl. She wasn't yet bad girl, she was just Rihanna, right? And then, so certain things weren't acceptable because who the heck do you think you are? I can't remember the last time I've seen anybody ask, who the heck does Rihanna think she is? Everybody's like, Rihanna is whoever she thinks she is, right? That's a disposition, and that's what brand equity. I'm just using that because I don't even really follow or care, but it's just a good example because it's a relatable example.
I probably just gave a bad example.
You say what?
I probably just gave a bad example. I mentioned work. Am I old? When that work came out? Sorry,
I know, right? I was trying to think of the title of the song from Black Panther. Lift Me Up. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Old age.
God bless you. God bless you.
So lift me up, right? So that's my point. So you need to build the capital, right, in relating with people. It's very simple. If after this conversation, if I came and I joked, I was like, Emmanuel, how dare you say that? Don't do that. And a complete stranger says that, you're going to be thinking, I don't know you. Don't speak to me in that manner. But your friend can get away with saying so much worse, right? Because of who they are and your perception of them and intent as well. Because perception affects how people also see your intent as an organization. Have you noticed the organizations people will say, oh, this was a mistake, they didn't mean it. But then they look at other people and they're like, oh, this is how, they don't particularly care, and it's their carelessness that has gotten them there. So you kind of have to be very mindful. I call people who handle brands like communications, you have brand owners and brand minders. So you're literally minding the brand, right? So it's very important to be mindful in that process of building credibility and that equity and good relationships, positive sentiments and the works.
Okay, so now we know what to do to create a plan and to be proactive, right? And to build that brand equity.
Yeah.
Now, let's take an example of a very lean startup. Very, very lean. 10, 15 people max, right? they are all spread thin across different roles, right? CEO is looking for the next milestone, that the next fundraising or the next product launch or whatever. The product manager, engineers, designers, they're all on hard deadlines. Where would they find the resources to actually build this brand? And on what scale should they put it as against other things that they are chasing?
I think that's a tough. It's a good question, and it's a multi-layered one. The truth is, the question of financing at that early stage is very important. But I think if you have 10 to 15 people on your team and you don't have a communications professional, you're doing something wrong.
Okay, so what's the limit of numbers?
It's not really a number thing. You just need to identify your need at that time and find someone with the combined competence. So for instance, you can have someone who's an account executive, has a PR background, but is also great with digital campaigns. So that person can probably man your social media and can still understand at least the basics of, communications and stakeholder management, right? So at every level, if you can afford a 10 to 15 people team, you can definitely and should be investing, especially if you're a tech company. It means you're running on digital engagement and any kind of communications, right? So you ought to have, I would say, that team size at least two, least two in very key roles. I imagine you have someone to copywriter or digital, person, what's it called? Digital marketer or something of the sort, because you're focusing on conversion. But you should have someone whose job is storytelling and understands how to communicate, what to say, what not to say, basic PR, at least understanding on that level. And, when that's not the case, deal with consultants. There are lots of companies, agencies, independent consultants. Find a professional who comes in, looks at your plan, creates a plan for you, even if on a quarterly basis. We did startup because we started off working at Phenom Communications, started off working with startups and SMEs, right? And we would do consultation because we understood that not every startup and SME could afford our services, and we noticed. So we would have training sessions where we would teach people how to manage that, and consultation sessions. So people are out there in the communication space preferring solutions that are affordable and keep startups and SMEs in mind. Find somebody and make sure you have a plan. It's very imperative. It's very, very imperative.
So, okay, so I think it makes sense. You can find people who can be straddling those.
Exactly. Who manages it on a micro level, and then you can have a consultant who works with you quarterly or something of the sort. So you have this one-off engagement. They provide the plan that this other PR professional within your organization goes on to execute. But get help and make sure you're working in brand consciousness, because numbers and all of those things are great. But even with investors, I notice people come in when they start looking for investors and they want to scatter around one or two media placements. It's a start, but that's not how it works. You need to have been building. You need to be, with all of the milestones and different things you're doing, there has to be that consciousness of developing and building the brand, because it will carry everything. I always find it hilarious when people prioritize sales and marketing over brand development and PR. Why?
Money.
It's putting the cart before the horse. No, but I understand the why, but it doesn't change the fact that it's hilarious and it's not sustainable, because you spend more in the long term. If you have a brand, you will attract things. But as long as you're sales and marketing driven, you're constantly in pursuit of things. So you can either, and it's slower, more difficult work.
So more outbound instead of more inbound.
Exactly. But you position, if you're doing the work, you get to the point. The idea is to build a brand that attracts investors, that attracts the right clientele, that tells an interesting story that people are excited about, right? You need to kind of build that has the right relationships, a community framework. And then, because if you build a successful community of brand ambassadors, they will literally do all of your marketing for you, everything, right? People are up. Stats in terms of referrals is over 50-something%, like 55%. And in some other cases, depending on your industry and context, 67% of people would only use a product that they've been referred to. On average, I don't believe I've seen a number lower than 55% across any sector or industry, which means if you actually have people who believe in the brand, who have buy-in, stakeholders, oh my God, sorry.
No problem.
Who are stakeholders, right? And they will market the brand for you. They will tell people about it. It's more attractive and it's more believable because people depend on peer-to-peer. Yeah, so the numbers for referrals, people who use referred business, 55%. People who will only use or would refer businesses that they like, it's about 85, between 85 to 87%. So those are pretty high numbers. And the work that allows you build a brand community is not your product or just marketing and sales. That's brand development and PR work, right? That makes people feel attached to the brand, that allows them start to identify with it, that allows them see a little bit of this themselves or who they are in the brand and whatever it is you're accomplishing. So yeah, guys, invest in, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a communication professional or I'm a PR person, but it is because I know this that I am in fact a PR person. I watch too many creatives and startups and founders struggle to launch brands, great products, great content, clothing, whatever, no concept whatsoever how to launch, to market, to build a brand that can sustain itself, right? As self-sustaining. And lots of times, 3 out of the 7 reasons small businesses fail, top 7 reasons, branding related, communications related. So
Wow.
if you think you can neglect that, I don't know, you
Wow.
know, that's like a what % chance of failure?
Yeah. So thanks for addressing that point, because it also leads to my next point, right? There's where to put communications and branding on the scale of things that they should regard as important. Then inside branding and communications, there's communicating to customers directly,
Yeah.
and there's media relations.
Yeah.
So talking to journalists. Most of the time, what I have found so far so good is founders are only interested in talking when they have news to share. And the version of news to share is they just raise money.
Yeah.
Most of the time, some of the time you see, oh, we just changed logo. We just launched this new product and we believe it will change the world and all of that. That's the only time they want the media to cover them. But say I'm working on a story, I'm doing a deep dive or analysis, and I reach out, most of the time it's, okay, can we move this then? Can we move this then? And at the same time, I will be very honest. I've seen this, okay, this is a transactional thing. You don't owe me the insights and I don't owe you coverage.
Yeah.
When you reach out for that you're funding
Yeah.
product announcement, right? If we see it as interesting, we'll cover it.
And we'll
If
cover
we
it.
don't,
If not, we don't.
really. But I've noticed something, right? I'm just sharing this based on my experience. So I've noticed that, okay, founders or experts that are willing to share with me in those times where, okay, I need insight for a story, I need to know the behind the scenes details about an issue. I mean, I've talked with founders around 12 midnight.
Yeah.
WhatsApp call. Right? I've talked with founders around
Yeah.
that time. Also, I've gotten calls from founders pitching their startups
Yeah.
early in the morning in church. Mr. Emmanuel, this is we are building the next in church, brother. But that is the reality of things, right? So I'd like to know what you think about building media relations, because to be honest, there are a lot of things these founders are worried about.
Yeah.
They don't want to be worried about this upstart journalist that is chasing deadlines, right? So I was talking with this founder and investor. Should I mention his name? Yes, Inyaboeji, the founder of Flutterwave and
Flutterwave and Future Africa.
So we're having some kind of exchange on LinkedIn, and he was like, he would not want the first interaction he has with a journalist to be a quote for a story. He wants to get to know the journalist first. He wants to get to build a relationship with that journalist first. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
But the question is, how many founders have the time to be building that relationship with a journalist, to be having that kind of rapport with a journalist? And how many journalists have the time? They're chasing this story, they're chasing this paystack story, they're chasing this. How many of them have the time to be building the relationships with the founders? So maybe you can help us make sense of this.
Okay, so I would split the answer into two,
Okay.
right? Startups that do not yet have funding and startups who have funding, because the approach and responsibility is different for both. Because one set of founders have resources and as such no excuses, but the others might have a bit more challenges on that end. So I will start with the guys who are still maybe early stage or even further along, but have not yet raised funding, so they don't have those kind of resources for like a PR agency or firm or professionals at their disposal, and they have to do the work, their team has to handle the work or they have to do the work themselves. This is what I will say. You don't need 17 journalists. You don't need to build or chase relationships with 17 journalists. Start with 2 to 3 key people who you trust, who you have relationships with, who you can build credibility with. And don't just reach out to people for stories alone. When you meet people, talk to them, check up on them. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. I mean, we've been interacting. Everything hasn't been, I'm pretty sure I sent you like a Christmas or a New Year message. You just deal with people and you relate with people. If you see anything interesting, make the effort. The same way you prioritize networking and meeting, investors. The media is such an important stakeholder. So media as a group, such an important stakeholder in successful business development or brand building. So you need to be able to treat it with that level of priority. So start small, right? Build good relationships with one or two. Just pick two key to your industry, maybe one in the tech sector, one in the larger business sector, and cultivate the relationship. Send them a birthday message. At least you follow these two people. Find a channel where you can connect with them. Celebrate their successes and their wins. If you have activities going on, invite them. Do you understand? It doesn't take a lot to build relationships because everyone is busy. So people are not asking to be your best buds. But when you actually care about people as individuals, you care about their work, you ask them from time to time. I have journalist friends who are like, oh, I need this. And they're not even my clients. I just look around in my network and I'm like, oh, why don't you do this? Right? Oh, okay, I can find someone I can help out. Are you the kind of person that people can come to for favors, and how do you help out? It's not just monetary or that kind of, it's not that situation. So you just take one or two. Ensure you can start with one if two is too stressful. And then when you master it and you understand how to build those relationships, you go to 2 and 3. And you're going to look around one day and like, oh my God, we have like very solid media relations. It doesn't happen all at once, not even for us as PR professionals. I have more friends in the media now than I did when I started out 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 9, 10 years ago, exactly. So I'm even talking about when we started Phenom Communications. So you just build those relationships and they keep growing and evolving, into other things. And every time you find an opportunity, make it a part of your strategy to carry them along, treat them like stakeholders, right? The same way you have a plan for your customers, make a plan for them. So that's like the cost-effective plan. Because when people treat us well, they respect us, they are helpful professionally, we're also more likely to care about what they have to say and give them a fair shake and fair hearing. So it's just basic human relations, right? So just make it manageable for yourself and don't overwhelm yourself. Now for companies who have raised money.
The ones that have big banks.
Go and get PR firms and professionals, or hire people in-house with the competencies to manage those relationships for you. If you're very busy because you're building products, you're entering new markets, you're doing all of these wonderful things, make sure you've covered that base and there's someone who is very good at their job, who can build the relationships you need for your organization. And you need to be careful because there's a difference between that person leveraging their own relationship and building it for the organization. And I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but you need to make sure that if you have a comms person, they're not just putting in their pocket everyone they bring your way, right? They should be able to create positive sentiments, not just towards themselves, but towards the company, so that when journalists are acting, they're not just acting based on that one-on-one relationship. Do you understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that would be my recommendation for both types of startups, depending on where you are, underfunded, decently funded.
Okay, so you work with founders. So what would be your recommendations for us journalists on how to build the relationship with founders or the startups that we cover in this instance?
I think LinkedIn would be a good place to start. Follow them, celebrate them on their wins. I don't think you'd be hard pressed to find a founder who doesn't want to build relationships unless they're pretty arrogant. And I can't imagine why you'd be arrogant enough to think you don't need media relations, right? Even if it's just to prop your ego up. So if you're that arrogant that it's ego-based, you've met people. That's new for me.
No, so I feel like it's segmented. If it's a media company, they respect, and most of the time the respect usually goes to, say, foreign media companies. So if you write for Forbes, you write for FT, you write for TechCrunch, I think I might be wrong. I don't think I am. I might be wrong, but
I'm sure you know what you're talking about.
I feel there's more respect towards these guys, and I would be self-aware enough to say, okay, respect is not given, has to be earned. So we, the local media, have to actually earn this respect of the founders in a way, right? But it leads me to question, what have we been doing all these years and all of that?
I don't believe as a PR person, I would not see like a Techpoint or any of the other tech companies, respectable tech media companies as not worthy of respect. I've dealt with journalists from, I would say a lot of the key tech media companies, yourself, Techpoint, About, all of these other guys. And I find them to be very respectable and having proper etiquette, more so than maybe mainstream, journalists. So I don't think it's a question of respect. I think it's a question of, it's quite unfortunate, but it's a very Nigeria thing we're recovering from, to not really respect locally grown efforts. Because how did Forbes and all of these other guys start finding Nigerian startups? It was the work of Techpoint, the Tech Cabals, Zikoko, what have you, all of these guys who kind of pioneered communications in that space, and everyone else we're forgetting who may have come before them. But at least in my time that I know of was the Zikokos, the Tech Cabals, Techpoint, of course. So there has to be, I don't see why you would necessarily respect international journalists more or less, because you're especially if you're building a product for the local market, which a lot of Nigerian startups and African startups are doing, you can't play with local media, because if Forbes raves about you and local media platforms ignore you, you still have a problem, because this is where your market is.
I have a theory about that.
Okay.
The goal is to chase investments, and those guys have the eyes of investors. If the goal is to chase customers, so this is the funny thing, right? Google wants to announce something, they want to launch something, and they strictly invite local media.
Yeah.
Or let's say if startup wants to announce something, they go for foreign media, the Bloombergs, the Forbes, the TechCrunch. That is what I see happening, because that is where the investors are. That is my theory. So I'm willing to be debunked. And if there's anybody in the comment section who wants to debunk me, please.
I think it's a solid theory. I'm not knocking the idea of or the role and the importance of foreign media when it comes to, attracting investors. But what I'm saying is, local media validates whatever theory foreign media has about you, and it depends on if people know what to look for. Because I know I've seen several instances where people who are looking to invest first tap into people who've been there in the tech industry, maybe more senior, older players, to do some inquiries on these brands. What do you think about, these brands? And sometimes they ask journalists. I'm sure you've been approached by prospective investors about questions about a brand. So if you've ignored your home base for your international base, when people come knocking and asking questions, that's not going to be a very good look for you, because I'd be very wary about someone that international media is talking about but has no local relevance. And international journalists are not stupid. Like, what are you trying to be, the Anna Delvey of the tech industry, where you're all the way in New York and nobody knows anything about you, where you come from? That's kind of sketchy, or you don't have that same reputation. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a joint effort. You should have good media representation and relations locally as well as internationally, right? Mm-hmm. That's a more sensible approach, because before even international media will cover you sometimes, they're looking to see your local impact. Who has carried you? People know Techpoint internationally and even across Africa. I'm saying this as a PR person. People know Tech Cabal. And if you're looking for stories, those are two of the first places. You have TechNext and all the other guys. These are the places that you would look at to make sure that there's proper and adequate representation, right, before you then start doing all of that international coverage. When clients come to us and they tell us, so we want international notoriety, the first thing we check is, how's your local representation, right? Because a journalist who is investigating and thinking clearly about the story is going to be wondering, how is it that nobody locally is covering you? That would raise an eyebrow for an intelligent person. So I want to know, what's your local impact? Have you not done anything worth talking about? So you cover your bases with like local, regional, and then you move into international. It can be done simultaneously, but there has to be a local plan in place. I think it would be, that's not a wise way to go. Let's just summarize. It's not a wise way to go, ignoring local journalists.
That's quite,
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. And yeah, I actually see the value of having this relationship with the media, because just like we pointed out with startups or companies that have this public goodwill, media goodwill sounds like, hey, this happened. This guy is this, he's this, but he's not what you guys are saying.
Exactly. Yeah. And that can only come from a place of relationship. I can't vouch for you if I don't know you. It's like being a character witness that has no idea. There are things you need to fulfill to be a character witness. So in the same way, people need to be able to witness for your character. If someone said something about me or my company or dealings, there at least I count a couple journalists who'll be able to be like, I don't know that that's very true. I've worked with this person, I've experienced them. You understand what I mean? So it has to be like that when you're a founder, in terms of from an organizational perspective. Who knows you? Who can vouch for how you deal with your employees, for instance, or people? Can even people in the ecosystem, can they vouch for you? Because I've noticed that people are very careless with relationship management and how they treat people. And I was telling someone something just in the PR space. I had someone, an influencer, as a random story, who had behaved so badly at an earlier stage of my career, came back and they did not remember that they had behaved so poorly. I'm looking at them the entire time and I'm like, thank God I love Jesus. Just because I'm looking at them and thinking, oh, but you let it go and you let bygones be bygones. But what happens a lot of times, when you treat people poorly, you tend to forget. But the people who you treat in that manner, rarely ever, that person always remembers because they've received the short end of the stick. So what am I saying? Or where am I going with that? You want to be respectful and careful about the relationships and the interactions you're having with all of these people. Don't be dismissive. The people who go on to work for international platforms were once local journalists, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure you know at least one person in TechCrunch who used to work with you guys, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So they were local journalists. That person goes international and they're the only one covering Nigeria, but you were rude to them when they worked in local media. How's that going to work out for you? So there has to be, just be a decent person, you know, beyond just journalists in your ecosystem. You never know who has the ear of the people who are talking to you. And that happens a lot more than people realize. You're sitting in a room of someone who has no idea who you are, but hasn't behaved appropriately at some time in the past. And I'll give a positive example because I don't name names. Like if I'm ever in a room and Zainab Balogun's name comes up for any kind of project, I'm fighting for her. Why? In the very early stage, I'd reached out to a whole group of people and a lot of people were so rude and dismissive, but it was the kindest no. She didn't agree to work with us, but it was so professional and respectful that it gave me, I don't think I've had any interaction with her whatsoever, and it doesn't matter. But if the opportunity ever presents itself and I have any kind of say in a project or contract, I'm definitely vouching for her and fighting for her because I can speak to her decency and professionalism. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's that simple. Just be a decent person and treat media respectfully. They are important stakeholders and partners if you kind of manage it well.
That makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to address this elephant in the room from the whole story that came out, I think, around last week. So LaserPay, crypto startup, shut down a few weeks ago. And I guess some journalists have been reaching out to him for a story. And he didn't like it, so he posted it on Twitter. So the optics of that aside, for when negative stories happen like this, is there a time founders should take for some time to grieve before they decide to address the media? And for the media, how long is too long? Do we wait for them to reach out that, hey, I'm ready to tell my story? Those are the kind of questions I'm trying to
I think the thing is, it's not a sharp or clear answer in that way. So let me look at it from the perspective of the founder. For the founder, I can't imagine that it's easy, right? It's your dream. It's hours of sweat, labor, and possibly blood, that you poured into the startup and you're finding out everything is failing. That can't be an easy place to be in. That must be very frustrating and kind of disheartening. And when you add the layer that you've probably sunk your savings, as they did, as the guys and the founder of LaserPay and his co-founder did, into building the business, your savings, that's money you could have done something else with. You're having to watch it. It's a huge part of your life, right? And it's a big deal. So I can understand why a person would be emotional and not in the mood to talk and address it. But I think this is the burden of responsibility. You can't have the one without the other. So if you enjoy the positive stories and you rode the high wave, you did all of that stuff, take the moment to grieve, but also be accountable. If the media was your partner and ally when you were doing well, and I saw really great stories about LaserPay in the media, you were given fair and good coverage. You can't now just all of a sudden determine that you don't want to speak to the same people because it's not going well. However, timing is key. I think some journalists need to be better behaved and sensitive. I understand that storylines, it's a very short attention span, short cycle. People may not care in a month, so you can't wait that long. And everybody wants a scoop and a hot story. But I think it's more so about how you approach. Hi, I'm really sorry to have heard this. I'm sure you may not want to talk now. But when you can, please, I'd be appreciative if you consider us for your first exclusive. And if a story or article won't work, invite them for an interview, right? And share perspective on why it would be a good idea when they are ready. So give them the option and just respectfully check in from time to time. You can't badger people into talking. It's either people have the perspective that they want to get ahead of it and ride the wave, in which case they're looking for that media coverage. But if people are clamping up and they don't want that media coverage, they're eventually going to shut down. Of course, with journalists, it's a bit tricky because there's quite a bit of push that leads to stories or prodding and pushing, right? But if you, and this is why relationships are important. If you have a relationship, even when people are down, you would have their ear and they'd be willing to speak to you. So I think it's that thing of building the relationship beforehand, or even being respectful, even if that's the time you're entering the person's space when there's an issue or a crisis, and just let them know you would like to talk because you want to give them a fair shake and you don't want to release a story that doesn't make them look good. Do you understand? Just the notion of being heard or respected or being treated with fairness goes a long way. Now, going back to founders, there has to be balance. As much as there's your person, there's your persona. So you are a human being, right? You are Emmanuel, but there's the person who is also a journalist. So you must understand the difference between how you feel as an individual, versus or vis-a-vis your professional role that you were. You're a CEO and a founder. So you have to address it. There has to be, and I saw that there was an official statement, but it could be more robust. Now, if you want people to give you time, state it. That's something that I would do. If I had a client who did not want to talk about it, we would include it and say, we're going to be silent and we're not giving interviews at this time because we want to take time to go over, just to be reflective. We're in kind of a reflective space to see what we could have done differently and to consider our next steps. As soon as we've done that, we'd be more than happy to share. So you've informed people that you're in a no comments space, right? At that point, it's fair. The second thing that was such a massive blunder was posting screenshots on Twitter. Beyond the optics, that's a very unprofessional thing to do, extremely. Like we said, we understand you're probably feeling a lot of things at the time, so it's understandable. However, not advisable, right? Only, like I was joking with you before, that's a very Elon Musk-y thing to do. And that's generally not advisable behavior, and for good reason. So you don't want to be seen as being antagonistic towards the media because people will remember this is just one venture. Most founders have several businesses, and like a lot of entrepreneurs and founders are serial founders and entrepreneurs. So you will come back and try and do something else. And the media that you've treated in that manner, even the people you haven't directly treated, because I've seen the stories, even the journalists who weren't directly affected were offended because it was perceived as being hostile towards the same media who give startups a platform. So that's not wise. You're going to come back with your other business idea, but I'm going to be like, no, I don't want to hear. If you want, we have this paid segment of our website. Kindly refer to it for the sum of, and as a journalist that people do and will treat you in that manner because you haven't honored the basic code of like stakeholder management and relationship management. So it's not advisable. Give an official statement. If you don't want to talk, be clear when you give your exit statements for your business that we're taking this time to reflect and we're not commenting at this time. And that have you and journalists also be respectful. People are founders and all, but they are still people and it is their life. It's not a story or a hot scoop. That's somebody's real life, falling apart. So there has to be that balance, I think, on both ends. Yeah.
Makes sense. So coming back to crises and issues with startups, before we go to, I want us to actually address case studies.
Okay.
Companies you feel have done really, really well, and companies you feel has done really, really poorly. We can mention names or you can give us hints. That's your call. But before then, I want to actually discuss the part for employees, where something is happening in the company and employees are feeling like, does this company have a future? Do I need to start applying for new jobs? I mean, we've talked about the external communications, right? To put customers, clients, and investors at ease and building your brand externally. But employees also need to believe that
to be reassured.
This company is something I want to
bet on and I want to help build. I actually think quite a number of startups do a good job in that regard because you have people who, even after they've left places, speak very well. I find that while the startup space might hold some of the most toxic cultures, they also actually, if you ask me, they have some of the best work cultures as well. in Nigeria, as it were, in contemporary Nigeria.
Techpoint.
So, yeah, exactly. So some people who enjoy and just absolutely love going to work that I know or work in the tech space or at startups.
So how do you achieve that?
I think
Is it branding thing or?
I mean, there's still communications. We've had to learn, even as a PR company, internally, we're managing people. Those are mistakes that we've made as well, building a business. You're so focused on the work that you're not taking the time to reassure your internal stakeholders. I think it's a business lesson that cuts across board. But since we're on startups and founders, there has to be buy-in. I think that's the most important thing. People need to feel like they are a part of it. If people feel like they're just workers coming to do a job, when the time comes, they're going to jump ship because a job is a job. But when you make people stakeholders and you treat them accordingly, they're not dispensable. You're respectful in how even if things get so bad. I remember in COVID-19, we had a couple more months and we needed to rejig and people had to go. People knew 3 months in advance that we were pausing at our organization. We spoke to people. We told them this is what we're looking at. If we're going to survive and kind of weather the storm, these are the choices that we need to make. So people had 3 months to look for jobs. They were promised great referrals, conversations, whatever it was that they needed to make that transition for the guys who had to go, right? So just be sensitive. It's not so much about letting people go or bringing people on board. It's about being considerate of people and guiding them through different aspects of the journey. You treat people like human beings. You build a culture that allows people to feel like they're part of it. The truth is, retention globally with Gen Zs and millennials is at the lowest it's ever been in the world. So don't beat yourself up as well if people are leaving. That's life, but you work for retention. Your job is to make sure you're creating a healthy, happy kind of work environment where people are comfortable. Do you understand what I mean? Like they feel like they're part of something big and people will stay, people will build with you. When bonuses are, even if you don't have money or, because that startup phase is a bit rugged and you're building, but when there are positives and the company is doing well, people should feel it as well. It can't just be ride with us and then normal. When things are really great, they have to also be able to be a part of the highs and lows. If they're part of the lows, they have to be a part of the highs as well. So I think it boils down to culture. That's really the answer. The culture that you create. If you understand that your first customers in any organization are actually your employees, you will treat them appropriately. Because it doesn't matter how many clients you have. If you lack the staff and the employees to kind of carry that workload, you're not going to get anything done, right? So you just treat your people with as much respect and you allow them feel like stakeholders, like have ownership of the brand and your activities. And then, they will stay when they need to stay. And if people leave, at least people are leaving on good terms and not on like so messy terms. And some people will still live on messy terms because that's life. You can't make everybody happy. So you deal with that part as well. But if you identify patterns, just fix it. I think a lot of people are in denial and want to say it's all you. And it's possible that you may be hiring some of the wrong people because that's another reason people don't stay with you. Not everyone is built to build with people. And there's no shame in that. Some people are soft workers. Like when everything is all set up and fine, they come in. And that has the benefit of security. But for the guys who are with you, who are in the trenches, like we joke, who are with you and are able to build, make sure you're hiring the right kind of people for your stage of business. Make sure a good culture is in place. Ensure they can see their future. So when you're planning, you're not just talking about the company, what is their future in the context? How does it make their careers better? How does it make their lives better? Right? So if there's something in it for people, you treat people right, people see themselves as being part of something bigger, then they will build with you and they will stay with you.
That makes sense. It reminds me of an article one of our reporters, now an editor, wrote in 2019. Is your startup failing? Tell your employees. So imagine seeing a news article about your startup that you work for, that no, this startup is facing crisis. But in meetings, Monday stand-ups, the founder is promising you the world, telling you this, we're moving this, but on the article. So in my head, if I already trust this founder, I'm going to go and bash that media article. What are you talking about?
Meanwhile, that's the truth. I think this is funny because I have a real life case study of something like this happening. I think what happens sometimes at the early stage, it's something that people learn. And I also had to learn running a business, being honest with people. And it's not so much dishonesty as much as you hope to take care of things. That's like what it feels like being in a leadership position. You want people to just focus on doing their jobs. You don't want to burden them. But you forget that if things go wrong and you can't actually handle it, it's people's lives. But I think a lot of people make that mistake honestly and innocently. They're just trying to handle things, hold down the fort, do their jobs so everyone else can do their jobs. So it's not deceit a number of times. Sometimes it is, but a lot of other times people are just trying to figure things out. They've made some projections and then you learn it doesn't work. But now I think as you learn and as you go, tell people from the beginning, this is where we are. This is how much pipeline we have. These are expectations. This phase won't be pretty, but if you stay with us, this is what the next 5 to 10 years look like. This is what we're building, right? It's not going to happen. People are actually going to have to build it. And it's a very rugged stage if you've not gotten to the point where you're comfortable and you're funded and everything is. And not a lot of people will want to sign up for that. Some people are just there for the now, maybe to gain a bit of experience and then jump ship to somewhere. So you're a step and a ladder in people's journey. And that's okay too, as long as people put their best foot forward while they're with you. So yes, if your startup failing, absolutely tell your employees. I think that's it's a mistake a lot of people learn the hard way. Some people are fortunate to come, maybe came in from the corporate world at the managerial level. So you already know that, or senior management. So you've learned and acquired skills that help you deal with that. But I think for a lot of founders who didn't go the corporate route, they're just trying to hold everything together. Don't do that. Tell your people what things are so that they know that there's urgency around the work and a lot of things that are happening. Communicate clearly and in precise terms like this. If we carry on the way we're going, we're not going to have money in 3 to 6 months. So we can't do this. We have to cut back. We have to do this and that. And just be as honest as possible.
All right. So I think to round things up, let's talk about the interesting case studies you found with startups that have done well and startups that have done not that well.
So are we talking crisis or in general now? Just in general.
Issues. Yeah.
Okay, let's say...
But if there's an example of a crisis, because I think crisis takes the cake in this instance.
Usually when people hit crisis, this is what I would say. We can't name names because the startup space is small, so everybody knows the stories that everybody knows. Mm-hmm. So that's the story. That's what we're going with. But I think one of the most popular or notable scenarios that happened in recent times, which everyone knows, people, when you get to crisis mode and it's very messy, usually people are hiding something and they are lying. With issues, it's just life happening. It's business happening, right? Not so great decisions or maybe miscalculations. That happens. There are issues every day. So I would say the thing with issues is once you identify a problem, deal with it. If you're to avoid getting to crisis stage, be honest about your weaknesses and your challenges. And if you're called out, don't hide behind it. One of the biggest mistakes companies make, especially in this era, is to lie. Want a little bit of your story get out in the media. Do not waste your time lying about it. The rest of it is going to come out and in full. That's just the nature of the age that we live in.
Should we keep silent instead?
Do not be. That is also a bad decision because people know, and this generation is very unforgiving of silence as well. Oh, but you kept quiet and you didn't see anything. There are times, I don't think you should be in a hurry to respond or react. You should assess the situation. But when you do decide to come forward, be honest. You may not tell everything in precise and exact detail. You know, there's wisdom in not, because a lot of people say they want the truth, but a lot of times we can't actually handle the full length and breadth of it. But be honest about the key issues and speak to people's concerns. That's how you focus. If this is an issue, don't skirt around it. Don't be a denier. Don't lie. And even if some of it is not true, take responsibility for the part of it that is true and get ahead of it. Right? It's always best to get ahead of it. And you know what? In telling your own story, you don't need to wait for things to come out. You can tell your story beforehand. It's not a crisis if you get ahead of it. So the way I would approach it is I would talk about your failings. I advise my clients. I'm like, talk about the things you did wrong and the wins and your learns. Own your story, your failures, and your narrative. Every business has issues and challenges. It doesn't matter that you haven't heard about them, but every organization has something, if kept and piled down, can become crisis worthy. Do you understand what I mean? So deal with it before it gets to that point and take things one issue at a time. And when you're in crisis mode, stop lying. It makes things messier. And if you ruin trust in the public space, it is that much harder to rebuild. It would take you twice as much, if not 3 times the amount of time. And people are always going to be looking at you suspiciously. That's when you start finding people changing management and CEOs to assure people that there's a new captain of the ship. So the ship is not heading in the deceitful direction. It's not driving over to deceitful port or lane. But you don't need to do that if you're just honest to begin with. take ownership and move on. Ride it out, be silent, don't be too talkative. I think another mistake people make is they talk too much in the media when they're in the middle of crisis. You must understand the right balance, give your speech, have the right conversation, stay quiet, weather the storm, fix issues, and come back to the public when you started to put things in place to right whatever wrongs have been highlighted.
That makes sense. So I guess if you leave me, I'm just going to keep going and going and going and going and going. But yeah, I think we've had a very, very, very interesting and insightful discussion. And if for those listening or watching this show, Techpoint Unscripted, don't forget that name. This has been a very, very insightful section on bracing your startup for crisis, nipping it in the bud, building a reputation, and we've had the amiable Teresa Aligbe. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, that Teresa Aligbe, close enough. Yes,
okay, good. So yeah, Teresa is the director of communications at Phenom Communications, and they've been doing an amazing work. So far, so good. How long have you guys been around?
Since 2017.
2017.
So
wow,
we're 6+ years old as an organization. So yeah,
that's cool. So Phenom Communications, they have a slew of products for startup founders that want to actually learn more about issues like this. Yeah. And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we have a newsletter. We started a newsletter because we noticed just on some of the things we touched on briefly, that people are so conversion focused that a lot of Nigerian and African startups aren't building brands, and it's problematic because in general in Nigeria we have an issue with sustainability with businesses in general. So we created a newsletter, very new. We're literally launching. So if you're interested, you can drop it. I'm sure Emmanuel will drop it, but it's a newsletter, a monthly newsletter. There's the freemium, there are free aspects of it monthly, and there are paid segments of it. And we're going to be having quarterly meetings for people who are part of that newsletter, where we kind of brief you and share trends, data, stats, and insight to help you build successful brands. So that's what we're doing. And you can hit us up for consultation as well if you need to build your business. So just register and leave a comment.
All right. Thank you so much,
Thank
Teresa.
you for having me.
And guys, what do you think about this session? Leave your comments, leave your talks. If there are anyone I can answer, or just go and drag Teresa to come and help us answer it. And if you want us to discuss all the aspects, so we mostly focus on crises and issues in startups, or the other angles to this whole thing. How do you even build this brand from scratch? Creating content marketing teams, creating solid communication teams, what to look for in a communications director or communications professional for your startup. So many things to discuss. And So, but of course, there are other issues in the startup space that I'll be hitting you with from time to time. And if you want to see more of this, make sure this gets to your friends, your well-wishers, and of course, your enemies.
And your aunties and uncles.
And
well.
Your aunties and uncles, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, please let this video find them wherever they are. And I'm pretty sure you guys enjoy this live stream format. Unscripted. We're still debating how much of name dropping we should be doing and not of that, but yeah, it's a good one. Please, you guys cut me off, please. If not, I'll keep talking. All right, people. See you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.